Brighton are paying a heavy price for their greed. In Brighton's 2-1 win over Liverpool, there was a detail that's easy to miss if you don't watch them regularly. Two players once tied to massive price tags, Kaoru Mitoma and Carlos Baleba, didn't start. In fact, both only came on midway through the second half. So the obvious question is, how do players who were once seen as premium assets end up on the bench? The answer is pretty straightforward. Their form just hasn't been good enough. Mitoma still has the same qualities, the dribbling, the unpredictability, but the output has clearly dropped, and that's why he lost his starting spot. As for Baleba, this simply hasn't been his season. Part of that comes from the transfer noise with Manchester United earlier in the year. It feels like his head hasn't been fully locked in. Late in the summer window, United showed serious interest in Baleba. Not surface-level interest, but real intent. The problem was they knew exactly who they were dealing with. Brighton and Hove Albion are known for setting extremely high asking prices. Reports suggested they were valuing Baleba at around 100 million euros, possibly even higher. That alone was enough to scare clubs off. United, on the other hand, were only willing to go as far as 75 million euros. A 25 million euro gap in the final days of the window is almost impossible to bridge. And that's where things get interesting. If you look at Baleba as an investment asset, Brighton probably should have cashed out at that moment. Because now his market value is rumored to be closer to 50 to 60 million euros. That's almost a 50% drop. This is where the debate around Brighton really starts. Ferguson was probably the clearest case of Brighton holding an asset to push the price higher. Early in the 2023-24 season, after his hat trick against Newcastle, he was being labeled as one of the most exciting young strikers in Europe. Brighton didn't just reject interest, they quietly positioned him near the 100 million euro range. To them, Ferguson wasn't just a player, he was a potential next Caicedo. The issue is they chose to hold at the exact peak of his value, and from that point on, the curve started going the other way. First, injuries. Ferguson dealt with recurring fitness issues, especially mid-season, which disrupted his rhythm. For a young striker, consistency and minutes are everything, and he lost that completely. Second, tactical fit. Under Roberto De Zerbi, Brighton didn't really build around a traditional number 9. The system favored fluidity, pressing, and link-up play. Ferguson has natural finishing instincts, but his all-around game wasn't fully developed yet, and that slowly pushed him out of the spotlight. Third, internal competition. Brighton never rely on one player. The moment Ferguson slowed down, they started exploring other options. And just like that, he went from being the main project to just another rotation piece. Now, you're looking at a completely different situation. Ferguson has moved around, even ending up in Italy with AS Roma, and his value has dropped to around 25 million euros. This season, he's played 22 games and scored 5 goals. Not terrible, but nowhere near what you'd expect from a player once priced at 80 to 100 million euros. And more importantly, the interest from top clubs has cooled off significantly. Brighton weren't wrong to aim for maximum profit, but football doesn't follow a straight financial curve. Player value doesn't just go up, it can drop very quickly due to injuries, form, or even tactical changes. Baleba is probably the clearest example of how far Brighton and Hove Albion are willing to go when it comes to holding their price. After a strong first season where he showed elite physical tools, ball-winning ability, and clear upside, he was quickly labeled as the next Moises Caicedo. And almost immediately, Brighton positioned him in that same price bracket, somewhere between 90 to 100 million euros. Manchester United did approach, and this wasn't casual interest, it was serious. But the issue was Brighton never really intended to negotiate at a reasonable level. They effectively shut the door from the start with a deterrent price. United were only willing to go up to around 70 to 75 million euros, and that gap was never going to be closed. Just like the Ferguson situation, Brighton chose to hold at peak value. But Baleba is not Caicedo, and that's the key difference. First, consistency. Before his move, Caicedo was already a highly refined midfielder in terms of control, positioning, and week-to-week reliability. Baleba isn't there yet. His game is still raw, driven more by instinct than structure. He can be dominant one game and completely lose control the next. Second, the mental side. Big transfer rumors came too early. When a young player starts getting linked with top clubs in 100 million euros tags, the pressure changes everything. Baleba no longer plays like a developing talent, but like someone already expected to justify that valuation. And that shift shows up in performances. Now, his value is no longer in that 90 to 100 million euro range. Recent estimates place him closer to 50 to 60 million euros, almost a 50% drop from initial expectations. And that's where Brighton start to feel the downside of their strategy. United are very likely to come back in for him. They still rate him highly, and one inconsistent season for a young midfielder isn't unusual. Especially if they secure Champions League football, their position in negotiations becomes much stronger. Brighton, on the other hand, still have the right to hold if they don't like the price, maybe somewhere around 50 to 60 million euros. But if Baleba goes through another underwhelming season and his value drops again, this could turn into a serious loss. Mitoma was once one of the most exciting players in the Premier League. During the 2022-23 season and into early 2023-24, he was basically the face of Brighton's system under Roberto De Zerbi. A winger with elite dribbling, constant highlight moments, and most importantly, that feeling of being unplayable in one-on-one situations. At that point, Brighton valued him around 70 to 80 million euros and had no real intention of selling. Plenty of big clubs were watching, especially teams looking for a true 1v1 winger. But just like the other cases, Brighton didn't open the door. They believed his value could still rise. The problem is, players like Mitoma are rarely able to sustain peak output for long periods. This is about efficiency, not talent. First, his style relies heavily on individual explosiveness. Players like that tend to have clear performance cycles. When the physical condition dips even slightly, or opponents start figuring out patterns, the drop in effectiveness becomes obvious. Second, injuries and fitness. Mitoma had muscle issues that forced him out during key stretches. That disrupted his rhythm, and for a player built on sharpness and timing, that matters a lot. Third, opponent adaptation. After a full season of exposure, teams started adjusting. They forced him wide, cut off his inside channels, and made him operate in much tighter spaces. That reduced his impact significantly. Mitoma is still a good player, but he's no longer that unstoppable version. His output has dropped, his influence has declined, and naturally, his market value has followed. He's no longer in the 70 to 80 million euro bracket. Right now, he's being valued somewhere around 25 to 27 million euros. And this becomes another example of Brighton's dilemma. They held him at peak value, expecting further growth. But football doesn't move in a straight upward line. Once performance drops, the market reacts fast. At Mitoma's current age, and with his output trending down, it's very difficult for Brighton to claim this as a profitable play anymore. Is the model wrong? No. When people talk about Brighton being greedy, they're usually looking at it from a fan's emotional perspective, not from the club's actual business logic. For Brighton and Hove Albion, price isn't just about closing a deal, it's a positioning tool. They don't lower prices just to move players quickly. They want buying clubs to truly want their players to the point where they're forced to pay a premium, almost against their will. And even when a player's form dips or their value starts to slide, Brighton are still willing to hold, even avoid selling to direct Premier League rivals, simply because they refuse to break the price floor they've created themselves. This is how they protect future deals. They understand their identity. They're not a traditional giant, they're a talent pipeline, a club built on buying low and selling high. The moment they start dropping prices too early or too easily, the entire market perception of Brighton assets collapses. So they accept that some deals will miss their peak, that some players will depreciate. That's the trade-off for maintaining a bigger system. And when you zoom out, the model still works. Transfers like Moises Caicedo to Chelsea for over 100 million euros, alongside deals involving Marc Cucurella, Alexis McAllister, and Ben White, show that Brighton don't just sell high, they usually sell at the right time. If you balance a few missed peaks against a system that consistently generates hundreds of millions in profit, there's no real incentive for them to change. So yes, you can call it greed, but more accurately, it's a calculated, proven strategy that has turned Brighton into one of the smartest sellers in the Premier League. And maybe it's even simpler than that. Sometimes they just want to keep the player, believing that on-pitch success will naturally raise the value of the entire squad. If there's greed in it, then it's the kind you respect. Because in a league that keeps evolving at a brutal pace, Tony Bloom and his structure have built a model that doesn't just survive, it thrives.